Welcome back to Wise Up on Air. We are backstage with Enrage. We've got a little introduction out of the way in part one, and we're excited to be back with an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Wieland, give us a little sneak peek of what you'll be talking about.
Yeah, so for the Strata libraries, we decided to create all of the or most of the audio processing with our own VST Enrage, because Enrage is such a flexible tool that we can create pretty much every VST we need on the fly within Enrage. And me and my colleague are going to talk about Enrage. I will start with explaining how the whole interface works, how the structure of the signal flow is happening. I will go through some devices and also build like a simple master device. Then I will show some examples how I implemented Enrage within the Strata libraries, and I will finish it off with some very cool sounding presets, which alter the sound of a couple of projects very drastically. So yeah, I'm giving to Jannik to explain what he will show after me.
Yep, so even if I like creature sound design, we're going to look at the Gore collection mainly today, because this is something else that I really like to do, some brutal and nasty stuff. And I will give a quick overview over 2 sessions and take a look at what's currently there and how we can modify this even further. And after that, we will also have some very short peeks at some creature presets that I created, because I just wanted to show them. And then we will also take a look at some more, well, let's call it technical stuff, such as denoising and audio restoration, which is something that you can also do with Enrage. And then we will find out how to exchange presets at the end.
That's fantastic. Again, like it's a cornucopia of techniques using the Enrage plugin, which is, a very deep, like resource for people to implement all kinds of DSP. I can't wait to dig into it. For folks out there in the chat, great to have you back, and glad we got the stream stabilized. As we're talking, please feel free to weave any questions that you have in, and we will surface those to the guests and try to support your educational journey along with us today. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Wieland. Let's take a look at the Enrage interface.
Great. So can you see something? Is the screen sharing already in the stream?
Yes, looks
Perfect.
great.
So let me start with the basics. I want to explain how the interface works, and we will start in the top left corner with the triggering section. When we play back audio, we don't see anything because Enrage is disabled, so we have to enable Enrage. So now we see the input signal, and we can set a couple of things here in the input section. At first, we can set the threshold. So the threshold determines at what dB value the triggering will happen. We can then also gain and change the release of the signal. If we, for example, turn down the release by quite a bit, you see that there are a lot of different peaks and transients happening. And if you want a smooth trigger, you can just increase the release. We also have sidechain in. Sidechain in won't do anything right now, because usually you need to send audio to the sidechain channel, and for Reaper it would be channel 3. So if you send audio to channel 3, you can activate it by pressing this button. We can also filter the incoming audio, and the cool thing is we can also use MIDI, poly, and mono. So we can use it as triggers to trigger certain curves or stuff like this, but we can also use MIDI to just play notes on a oscillator or something like that. Everything's possible. So triggering makes there are a lot of different ways to trigger things. And the cool thing is that, for example, now we have the triggering enabled. And if we go to the next section, the mod sources section, modulation sources, it will already be linked to the curves. So the trigger will already trigger the curve, and then we can route this to any parameter we want. We have a couple of regular modulation sources, such as curves, ADSR, maybe those are the most known, and also LFOs. And we also have some more special things. We will take a look at some of them later in the live stream. So I cannot talk about each one of them right now, but we also have some more interesting or unique things like the spring. modulation source. As you can see, it creates a quite different effect to an LFO because it has such a kind of ring out kind of behavior when you move the input. And you can also route this to the macros, but we will come to the routing later. Let me for now continue with the main section, the rack and devices section, because here down here is where the magic happens, where the signal is manipulated, where the audio is processed.
Okay, let's pause for a second on the at the input side, when we're playing back sound from a track in the DAW, the amplitude of that is being used. We're seeing it fly by in the window, and you're setting the threshold of that in the trigger section so that when that threshold is broken, we get some kind of modulation that can be started. And that's what you were showing in the mod sources section. So those two top panels are working together. The first one just grabbing the input amplitude, using it with the threshold, and then over on the mod side, that is being triggered by that amplitude, and you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with it, as you were illustrating different parameters that you can control using the amplitude, kicking off LFOs, starting or restarting them, and then some of that cool stuff that we'll dig into with softness and springiness and other things.
Yeah, so I can demonstrate it a little better. So when I put the threshold on top, there's no triggering happening. We don't see anything happening to the curve here. So only if we reach this volume, the trigger will do something. So just to make it a little bit clearer what it actually is doing here. So yeah, but you made a great summary.
Oh, fantastic. So that's just where it starts with Enrage. And as we can see, there's a lot more in the box. Definitely excited to see what happens next. Take it away.
Perfect. So the next section is as I said, the processing section. So we have over 50 different devices. I cannot go through all of them, of course, and they range from simple gain devices, which just like decrease or increase volume, delays, distortions, filters, and a couple of those devices are also not just simple filters. For example, this multi-filter contains a bunch of different filters. So some of these devices are very complex and can create very different kind of audio results. And we also have some more dedicated and special devices, such as the tame device, for example. The tame device detects overtone peaks and can decrease or increase those peaks, and you can even isolate those overtone peaks to then further manipulate the audio to your liking. So this is needed for very specific and very complex kind of presets that imitate very unique VSTs. So before I continue, let me quickly check one thing. Perfect. So how does the rack work? How does the signal come in? It comes in with a stereo in device, and it always goes down. So the signal is always coming from up to down. So in this case, it's going from stereo in to gain to stereo out. That's the overall structure. We can change that behavior, but I will come to that later. So as you already have seen, I can just drag any device I want in the rack and in the signal chain, and if it's connected to the stereo out and stereo in, it will be a serial effect in this case. We can also create parallel processing by just increasing the length of the devices here and just inserting something. So now we have parallel processing. It's that easy to set up more complex kind of signal flows, but the overall rule is always from up to down. So then the next thing are shortcuts, because the thing is that you can, like in many other plugins, you can press right click and then remove, copy, and paste the devices. But for me, that always takes way too much time to do so. So there are a couple of shortcuts that help you achieve your results much faster, such as dragging and pressing Control to like duplicate very quickly, then delete them with Alt and double click. And also you can mute them, because muting would otherwise be selecting a device and then pressing this button, but you can just achieve the same thing by just clicking and pressing Control. And the best thing about those shortcuts is that here in the top right section, you can open the settings and change those to your liking, because maybe you want the same shortcuts that your DAW already offers. That's what I always want to achieve within such plugins. So yeah, you can customize them. And the amazing thing about those shortcuts is that they also work in the modulation source section. So you can duplicate, you can delete, so we can clean up this mess up here to make it a bit more clear, clean. So all this kind of shortcuts work here as well, which is just very convenient. And we have another small thing that helps us work here. If we move a device up or down and there's a different device in the way, it will snap below. So we can change the structure of the signal chain very quickly. Let me quickly take a cup of coffee.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And again, I think as a professional sound designer, you kind of live and die by your shortcuts and how fast you're able to navigate.
Oh yeah.
So having those settings within reach up in the settings menu to be able to conform them to whatever workflow that you're used to and get those within hands reach are awesome. We got a comment in the chat from Joshua Hank, shortcuts very important. Yeah, so thanks for showing us that.
Great. So let me continue with the next thing. The next thing would be the favorite devices. So it's right here in a different category. And those devices are saved by the user, by yourself. So the thing is that, for example, if you decide, I, for example, like the vintage low pass and high pass a lot, because it has some drive you can apply. And if you have a setting which you want to save, you can just rename the filter, for example, vintage LP low pass for 12, something like this. And then you can just move it in your favorite device section. And now it's saved. It's that easy. You can just recall it by dragging it out of this field again. And this is just a very convenient way to save up your favorite devices. You can also delete this by just dragging it to the trash. So it's similar to the smartphone app deleting mechanism. So that's quite convenient. And you can do the same thing for the modulation sources as well. I don't have quite a lot because I set them up freshly every time. But for example, if we say this ADSR curve is just amazing, we can just drag it in here and it's saved. So it's very easy to recall, save, and delete those modulation sources and devices, which is just one very handy tool which came, like, I think in the latest or one of the later updates, and which just enhanced the capabilities of Enrage a lot. I really love this favorite section. So before I go to the next point, let me quickly check if I mentioned everything I wanted. I think I did.
Well, yeah, what I love as you're continuing to move through the interface is, you're exposing some of your workflow here as you moved up into the modulation sources and created those presets. We can see that you can start chaining those modulation sources. I assume that's what's happening across the different tabs of mod sources you have at the top.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so again, I think it's fantastic to see what's happening there and see your workflow as it's evolving. Thank you.
I will also, after I'm finished with the interface, start with a easy mastering device where the workflow is also shown a little better. But I will now explain the routing, because it's a very important part of Enrage. So we have two different sections where we can route to any parameter. So the overall concept here is that every device has certain values and parameters, and every knob with a hole underneath, like these ones, can be routed to. So for example, we can take a macro. A macro is just a customizable knob we can set to any value we want. And then we can decide by dragging up or down if it's a negative or a positive value. So for example, if we increase the macro, it will decrease the value if we want that, or we want to increase it if we increase the macro. We can set it like we want. Let's call this filter frequency, something like this. So we can set up the macro, but the cool thing is about the macros, you can route it to anything you want. So you can route it to so many different devices and parameters that you really can create a magic button, which then you can automate in your DAW. In Reaper, it's quite simple. You just have to move the knob and then show track in envelope, press it under parameter up above. And then you see here in this section, there's the envelope. And as you can see, while I'm moving, it's also moving the macro. So it's already connected, everything's working. So you can set your automation and completely change the sound if that's what you want with only one knob. So that's something very interesting about the macros, or very interesting use case. And the second area where you can route things is the modulation sources, of course. So it's the same logic. You can just click here and drag to any parameter you want. And then you just determine the value. For example, for LFOs, it's a little bit different because they always go beyond and above a certain frequency. So when I turn it on, you will see that it's, let's make it a bit clearer what I mean. It's a bit different because I don't decide if it's a negative or a positive value, because it will always go in both sides. So that's a bit different for the LFO. But for all the others, you can always decide a negative or only in positive value. So yeah, that's like basically the routing. It's very easy to route things from any position to any other position, and you can oversee all of that in the mod matrix. So if you have a lot of like connections created and you just want a better overview, you can click on the matrix and select some stuff here, change some stuff here. So that's also very convenient. Also,
and what we're seeing in that mod matrix, just looking back at it really quickly, is we're seeing all the places where you've dropped from the macro, you've dropped from the LFO. These are all the mappings that you just created as you were illustrating the flexibility.
Yes, that was, they don't do anything useful in this case. It's just an example, of course.
Sure.
But yeah, it's very, very quick to just add up and create so many connections. That's very, very cool thing about this tool overall.
And a dashboard as well to be able to adjust the ranges, delete them if they're no longer making sense. Just a great visualizer for that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's really handy. I also have to agree. Let me quickly check.
I'm imagining maybe that list gets kind of long in some of the Strata examples where there are a lot of macros built in that give you control over different aspects of Enrage, as well as the layers in Strata. So I know we'll dig deeper into that, but great simple illustration of that to get folks started. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm almost finished with the interface, but let me just quickly explain a couple of more things until I'm going to the next point. So when you're hovering over the knob here, you will see here in the rec section that there's an highlight about the routing. So you will always see where all your modulation sources are routed to, or your macros. So it's a very easy way to see what's happening here. Just a small hint. And one very amazing shortcut, which is not as good known or well known, is that you can swap the modulation sources up above here. And the cool thing is that all the connections you created will still be there. For example, if I say I don't want to use an LFO anymore to modulate these values, I can just take a curve, and then these connections still are there, as you can see, still there and waiting for the curve to do something. So yeah, that's it for the routing. I hope it made sense and was clear to understand. Let me wrap it up with the last things we are missing. The foot line here, the bottom line. So oversampling is something you might know. Sometimes it sounds good to put in some oversampling. Sometimes it doesn't really change too much, but it increases the CPU usage. So you should be careful if you need it or not. Or it depends on your computer. I have to say, like, some people have to care about that. Some people don't have to care about that. But yeah, keep it in mind that this could actually change the quality quite a bit if you turn it on. And then we have auto root. This means that usually when you insert a device and it's enabled, it will automatically snap into place. If you disable this, it will not go into a already filled space. It will only go into empty space. So usually it's turned on because I don't I think it's more useful turned on, but for some people, they don't want to create mess. So yeah, the next thing is show modulated values. And this is really, really important because only then the current value of the knobs, which are manipulated with macros or LFOs or any modulation source, are shown. So when I turn it off, as you can see, it doesn't show the current value. So if you're wondering why you don't see what's happening within your parameters, you can just turn it on. And yeah, the rest here is pretty self-explanatory. We have a limiter, which you can set, dry, wet, and output gain. I think there's not too much to explain when it comes to that. And we have on top, just have a couple of things. We can go back. We can also go back with Control Z, like in every DAW. I forgot to mention that when I talked about the shortcuts, but it's the same as in a DAW. And we have the preset section. I will show a couple of presets later. We have over 500, so there's a lot of stuff going on there. Also the CPU usage and the latency. The latency is compensated automatically by default, so I would just keep that on. Otherwise, you will see the latency up above here if you don't turn that on and want to apply some compensation yourself. So yeah, that's basically it for the interface. That's quick walk through all the different sections. I just quickly will check if I forgot something important before I continue.
Yeah, any other comments from Simon or Jannik? Anything worth highlighting over there? And Simon, you'll have to unmute yourself. Maybe.
So if there's nothing there, I would just continue, or are there?
Looks like Simon might have had a comment.
Oh, okay.
Let's see if we can find the unmute button over there. Tricky.
Okay, that was me.
Cool.
Too many unmute buttons.
I know, right? Any good comments there coming out of the overview?
I think it was a great overview, and it shows how easy it is to stay in the flow of designing your plugin to do what you want it to do, which is really key to remaining in the creative flow of designing a sound, so that you're not having to jump between different plugins to do different things. You've got access to all of these devices simultaneously, and as soon as you feel that, oh, I want to EQ it before I apply this modulation, you can do it. And I think the key to Enrage is it unlocks your creativity in a way that is difficult to emulate using different kinds of plugins.
Yeah, totally. We got a comment coming in from Axel Rohrbach, helping us out in the chat. LFOs are by default set to bipolar, so modulating up and down across the zero crossing. But you can switch that off and go unipolar, where the LFO will now go from 0 to only positive. And so, yeah, a lot of flexibility there to modulate the way that you need it to in order to, add that kind of movement to whatever it is that you're modulating using an LFO. Thanks, Axel. Great to have you in the chat, following along and helping us out.
I just did what Axel said. Now you can see that you can also determine if the value, for example, of this gain module is only decreased by the LFO. And when I switch bipolar on again, you can see it's now hovering over and above the middle of the frequency. So yeah.
Awesome. We got a great comment in from the chat from Jermaine. This will increase my workflow 10 times. Amazing. So well
Glad
done.
to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're ready, I will continue with the next part.
Great.
So the next thing I thought about is to create a quick and easy to understand mastering device, because I think the gunshot can have a little bit more loudness and can be cranked up a little bit more. So let's take a listen again. And now I prepared it already, but we will not take a look, but let's just see how it should sound then after we're done. So as we can hear, quite a lot of loudness going on, but the true peak isn't higher, so we just increase the overall loudness of the signal. So let's do the same thing. For that, we will use a multi-band distortion setup. And the first thing I want to do is create a input gain, because I want to decrease the volume a little bit, because then we have a little bit more headroom, because the gunshot is already pretty loud, and if we just let it through, we don't have as much headroom for the distortion later on. In the filter section, we have the 3-band split. So what it actually does is it's just, it has 2 crossover frequencies. We have a high pass, low pass, and a band pass happening. So it's split in 3 different signals. And let's set them to a couple of different values here. I know some people like clean values, so let's put in something pretty. So we have 150 and 1000. Just for this demonstration, they work quite well. And let's now quickly add some distortion in there. So we want to add in a distortion for each band. So now we have a distortion for low, high, mid, and high. And the thing now is that when we play it back, we hear all the 3 signals at the same time. So a quick workaround, for example, would be to take a gain device, put it in here, and set it to infinite dB. So now we will not hear the bass, now the mids, and now we shouldn't hear anything anymore. Perfect. And we can call this mute device. I saved this as well, but just to show how it's done by hand. So now we can listen to one of the bands separately and set the put some distortion in there. I like the soft preset. We have a couple of them, but I feel that the soft preset gives me the most out of the space of the knob. So when you turn when you put it on medium or hard, you have a smaller range where the audio will fit for this kind of purposes, when if you don't want to destroy the signal too much. So that's why I use soft for mastering or processing, master processing kind of reasons. Let's quickly just go through this, just applying a bit of distortion, decreasing the volume so that we can hear what actually is happening there.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's already better. Let's check if we turn it off. It's a little better, but it still can be a little louder, a little more. So let's add in some compressors, because they can also reduce the dynamic range of the signal. So I prepared a couple of them just to be a little bit quicker here, but I will explain in a second. So we have 3 compressors, and let's clean this up a little bit to make it a bit more pretty. So we have a compressor for each band, and the attack and release is already set to a certain value, which kind of works. For example, for the mid band, I like a shorter attack than for the high frequencies, because here the transient will go through better than for the other 2 compressors, because yeah, the attack and release, especially the attack of the compressor, can shape the transient, and that's what I do here as well. It's not only about reducing the loudness. So let's quickly go through them as well. I think this is a little intense. Yeah, better. Let's go to the next one. Maybe decrease the gain a little bit. We can play around with the attack to get more like the transient, mid transient getting through. But I don't want to spend too much time here. It should be like better already. And now we have a 3-band distortion compression module, which set up super quickly, and we can now add in some more stuff we need. For example, I really like the wave shaping distortion, which is with the soft drive setting, because it's just a subtle distortion you can just add with, like, let's say like 20 to 30% of wetness here. It just makes the signal a little louder as well. And now we are running into a problem because first we are clipping. Let's reduce the gain by 2 dB here. Something like this. I don't want it to something like that. Perfect. But the problem now is that we are running out of space, and we can solve this by using the tap devices. So we can use the tap send to take the audio from this position and send it to any other position. So we can send it to the tap receive device, and now it's already set up, so it will go from here to this device. So now we can increase the range of our signal chain. Let's take the stereo and put it here, and now we won't hear any audio anymore, because it's not connected to this and not connected to this. So let's quickly duplicate this. Oh no, let's take a new one because this already has some gain reduction. It's quicker that way. So let's insert that device. And now we have audio again. So we just increased the length of the signal chain with a tap device. There are a lot of use cases for this tap device. As you maybe can imagine, you can also use the tap send, for example, to send it to the envelope follow. Now you can have it within here, and then later send it back to trigger or modulate values before it's even happening. So there might be some use cases which are very complex, and Jannik, I think, will show a couple of different tap, send, and receive use cases which go further than just extending the number of devices you can add in one kind of chain. So what I want to show now is something a little bit more, I would say, interesting or special. So let's say the gunshot has a bit more loudness now. Has a bit too much bass, mid can be increased. And now we want to make it feel indoor, like it's the gun was shot in a building. So we can achieve that with a reverb, of course. Let's quickly take a reverb. The impulse response reverb, for example, it comes with a couple of different impulse responses. Let's just take the skate hall for now. I don't want it to start in the beginning. It's a little bit too loud and a bit too intense. So something like this. So it sounds roomy, metallic, more like metallic plate maybe. But what I really don't like is that it really muds the signal. Now the gunshot is not precise anymore at all. So this is a very great time to show the capabilities of the envelope follow. So I can just take the envelope follow. It will just follow the envelope of the audio signal. And I can make it decrease the reverb when the signal is the loudest. So in the beginning, where the gunshot is the loudest, the reverb is decreased. And I can take this further because I still don't like it too much. If you take a look at the line here, it's not very linear. So let's increase the hold and the release. And this is much more linear, as you can see. And now it's creating this soft fade in of the signal. Let's take a listen. Maybe even a bit too much. Cool. So I like this much more. It's much more soft and a very nice use case for the envelope follow, for example. And we can emphasize this a little bit more with a delay. So let's just put a multi-tap delay in. This is a favorite device. I just set up some delay settings here, but it's a multi-tap delay change a little bit. And we can do the same thing. We have now some reflections, which are too intense, especially in the beginning. I want these reflections in the end to happen, not in the beginning. They're too loud and have too many high frequencies. I don't really like that. So I do the same thing again. And now we have subtle reflections. We can maybe even increase them a little bit to make them more audible. And now it's like, for just like a very short amount of time, we created a pretty interesting indoor kind of effect, which works pretty well, even though it's on the master. So it's you don't always have to do everything on the single tracks. If you just have very little time, you can achieve very a lot of things within Enrage. And the last thing I want to show is just like one stereo effect many people might know. It's the Haas effect. It usually you can create it in your DAW, but it's always a bit tedious. So usually you use plugins for this kind of tools. But those simple effects all can be created within Enrage as well. So let's just insert a pan left and pan right module. So it just splits the signal in left and right. And now I can delay one of them with the fixed delay. The fixed delay just delays one signal by a certain amount of time. And if I put it on, like, let's say 10 milliseconds, you hear a very wide stereo sound. This is the Haas effect. I guess most of you know this. Just a quick example that you can even reproduce like very specific sound effects very quickly within Enrage without the need of leaving Enrage or anything like that. So yeah, that's it for the part of this device. I hope it was interesting to see how you can quickly build like a mastering or saturation device within Enrage. We could now set all the macros to the according bands, for example, maybe for the compression, distortion, and all this kind of stuff. But it just would take too long for now. So that's something, I would have, yes, you can do later on. Let me quickly check if I have everything I wanted to talk about.
But what an incredible run through, you know, from the original sound to something that is dynamic and explosive in a way that diverges from what you started with, but really represents the intention and brings a lot of drama to that sound just by sprinkling in, and I say just, but you know, clearly your ability with Enrage is on clear display here. The way you reached for these tools to help drive you towards a better representation of that sound, you know, expanding it to what you heard in your head. Fantastic evolution and true sound design. So congratulations. That sounds amazing. Can we hear the AB again really quickly?
Yeah, with the echo enabled or disabled?
Let's just mute. Let's just enable and disable Enrage. Oh yeah. It's night and day.
Yeah, much more louder. I mean, it's clipping 1 dB, but it's forgivable, I guess. So
excellent. Nice work. Any other thoughts from folks following along? Send us any questions that you have in the chat. And again, happy to have any other comments from folks joining us today.
great.
Cool.
If there, I can wait for the questions or continue, just like you just say how we go.
Keep rolling, and folks will jump in if they have something else to
Perfect.
say, but you're doing great.
That sounds perfect. So now I'm going to show a couple of examples within the Strata project, because I was told that it might be interesting to just go to a regular Enrage instance and just show what it's about. And we can do that in this project. So which project is this? This is the STG44 within the WW2 Firearms Strata collection, which is already online and can be used. And the structure of this weapon sound design is always quite similar. You might maybe have seen them in the Audiokinetic tutorials. So we have a body, main body group. Then we have a details layer with mechanics. Then we have a transient layer. Then we have a weight layer. And then we have the reflections. And the thing is that the structure is built like this because now, for example, if you want to have a more synthetic transient, you can go on this group of the transient and create a different kind of tone for that. If you want to have more low end, you can do that on the group for the weight. So it's very flexible. The structure allows you to quickly change and alter the sound quite drastically. And let me give you two examples. Let's start with something very simple. So this track contains a lot of mid information, a lot of body information. Oh, wait, I forgot to show one thing. Ah, yeah. So before I go into one track, let's have an A/B comparison between all the tracks played without and with Enrage. So let's listen to it again one more time. And let's now turn all the effects off. So what you can hear is very different signal, I would say. The problem is when you record weapons, the initial transient is very, very loud and the reflections and the body is very silent. And there are cool informations there, but you have to bring them back to light because as you can hear, with that, the weapon doesn't sound like a finished sound design. So Enrage enables us to do so, and we can go into some more detail about that within this track. So here we can also make an A/B comparison really quick. Very, very different sound. So the thing here is I will quickly explain the devices. I have an input gain where I reduce the volume because the file is quite loud. Then I have two compressors. They are set to different attacks. So as I mentioned before, I like to use compressors to alter the transient. But in this case, I didn't want to only do one of the two things, but I wanted to keep the transient alive and still reduce the loudness of the signal. So that's the purpose of the two compressors here. Then I reduce the wideness of the signal because it's just too wide, and this track doesn't really need the width it has originally. And then we have the high shelf. It just increases the high frequencies. Let me play that back. As you can hear, it's just giving a little bit more brilliancy, a little bit more high frequencies in there. The distortion module does a lot actually. When you turn it off, it's a night and day. So the distortion is the main thing here, I would say, or very important at least, because it creates a lot of new overtones for the signal and also destroys the transient and makes it the whole sound much more flat and creates a body kind of sound. And then we have the mid bell. It's just increasing the high mid frequencies as well as mid frequencies. Also very important. We can play that back as well. Also very different character. So these three are very important to create the sound, and we also have an output gain because the thing is now you can use the macros here to change all the settings. And sometimes if you crank up the distortion or other stuff, mid-bell, the signal might be too loud. So I always, or sometimes I like to have an output gain for this kind of behavior. So those are the tools I primarily use for most of the tracks. So I always like to, most of the time you need some saturation, some distortion, you need some equalization, so some basic things, but just they have to work together. And for the macros, as you already have seen, they are all quite simple in this case because they all only do one thing. But for this purpose, with this kind of simple devices, it makes sense to have simple macros or understandable macros at least. So let me show you one more special or specific Enrage instance. It's this one. As you can hear, it's a very simple and clean kick kind of sound. And it's totally generated only with an Enrage. So we don't have any signal coming here from the stereo in. We don't have stereo in. We only have a sine wave generator. So we have a couple of generators within the audio generators. Just they will always create sound. If we turn off this device here, you will hear a steady sound. So the gain device actually it creates the envelope for the value of the loudness, and we have the sine, and here we have also some stuff going on. So when you create a kick drum or like sub kick, you always have two frequencies. You have a high frequency and a low frequency, and you want the high frequency to go to the low frequency in a very short amount of time and with a specific curve. So the low frequency is the base frequency, and this curve here, which you can see up above, let me make this central, determines this transition from the high to the low frequency. And I can quickly demonstrate this by just altering the curve. So now when it's like this, it will just keep being on the high frequency, and now it only stays on the low frequency. So in between, we can change the character of the kick quite well. And the next thing we have is the gain device. It's just a device turned to infinite dB. I showed this for the mute device already, and it's just triggered by the second envelope, which just opens and then closes. That's everything it does, and it's all triggered by the input. So this this file here on the track is just the input trigger for all this two envelopes to do anything. So when we turn it off, we will only hear something. Yeah, just a very short click, and it's also panned a little bit to the left, but it doesn't matter because we only use it as a trigger, so we don't hear it anymore. So yeah, this is I have a similar example for this. Let's quickly go to a different project. The Canon. This is a Canon project from the Canon's library. Let's quickly hear it just like that. So that's one of the Canons. And we have something similar happening on this track. I just wanted to show because the sine wave happens a lot in the project because I want to enhance something. But here it's a little bit different because we have stereo in. There is something processing. We have a sub-octaver, which creates sub-harmonics and sub-frequencies below the signal frequencies. That are getting into the from a stereo in, and then we have a couple of different devices, but also this punch sound generator, and that creates some bass rumble, also very cool. It's as you can hear, it's quite a big difference because all the bass rumble is created with the sine wave. I just wanted to show this because it's very similar to the other one, and yeah, that's I think I'm reaching the end right now, but I have something cool to finish off before I'm starting to give to Jannik. I quickly want to check if I went through all the different things.
But what I love about this illustration is, you know, you're using that triggering information that you can get from the sound file. You're driving these envelopes. You're synthesizing you know, frequencies around the sound. You know, you're creating something, you know, filling a hole in the spectrum in order to, you know, further round out these sounds. It's a fantastic illustration of their question coming in from the chat. Do you often use a crackle noise from the generator to create a reverb tail? Like, is that a technique that you reach for?
For the reverb tail, I have to say, like most of the time, I use the tails from the files because they just have some interesting informations usually that I prefer to use recordings of gun tails. It always depends on the material because sometimes the tail within the original source file is very short and you cannot really do something with that. And then you can increase it with, for example, an impulse response. So make it wider. There are a couple of different ways. You can also use multi-tap delays if they're set correctly, if they don't sound too digital. So there are some tricks to enhance the tail of the file, but I didn't use crackling noise to create the tails yet. But it sounds interesting, so I will try that. Great tip from the chat. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, excellent. Great illustration.
Great. So let me round it up, my part of this live stream by showing something cool because I wanted to show some presets of Enrage. As I said, we have over 500 different presets, and the problem is that it's way too many to show, of course, but the thing is I wanted to illustrate is that you can take a sound and shift it to be something completely different with the presets. So I focused not on like just enhancing presets, making a bit more the signal a little louder, the sound design a little more brilliant. I wanted to really change the style and character. And I have two examples for this. So let me start with the first example. So we have our gunshot. We already heard it quite often now. And let me now turn on the first preset. So now it behaves more like a blaster synthetic cannon, something like this. You can set up a lot of macros here. Let me show you the next one. So now it's again some synthetic science fiction maybe preset, which is also quite interesting. And the third one for this project. I really love this third one because the tail is just like such a nice such a nice sound. And now the cool thing here is you can combine them. Especially all three together are really cool. So if you want to have more like a synthetic feeling, science fiction feeling to your weapon, you maybe can just put in some presets, render them out, and then implement them later as a layer or something like this. So I just wanted to show that you really can shift the audio to something completely different. And I want to demonstrate this further. Quickly close all these windows within the cinematic events. So this is an unreleased library with cinematic sounds, which will be released soon, I'm sure. Let's listen to the sound as it is. So yeah, this is one of my favorite designs within this project, and I created a couple of presets here as well. The first one will not alter the sound too much. It's just like a bit different tail or reflection reverb. Let's take a listen. I really like how it sounds like it's breathing something. It's a really cool one, but let's show some presets that alter the sound a little better or more. So again, aliens are on board, I guess. Let's just check the next one. Very crazy, this one. I'm not sure what's going on, but I really like this panning effect. I think it's just interesting. And the next one really changes the sound completely. You now would imagine that this sound is just created in Enrage, and it's kind of cheating if you just take a generator. But actually, if
I'm
mute,
not
for
seeing
example,
the preset currently. I'm not seeing
I'm
the
sorry. I'm sorry.
Enrage window. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So this is yeah, I will open them again and maybe show them again then. Sorry for forgetting that. So what I wanted to say is usually you would think that such a intense preset would be generated within Enrage, but it's highly dependent on the source material. So let's just turn off two of the layers and turn on all of them. As you can hear, it gets much more intense, and so it's very dependent on the signal, but the frequency, of course, is determined within the preset. And the last one I want to show is this one. Also very special one. I really like this motion kind of thing. And as you can see, those presets aren't that complicated. So they are quite easy to understand, quite easy to get into. All the macros are very convenient to be used. And of course, we can also combine some of these. To make it more crazy, but also to create something completely different if that's to your liking. And I think I didn't open two of them, so this is the third one. So we have an LFO that creates this wobble effect, of course, and this one I think I also didn't show. I just turned off the reverb. Perfect. I really like this one, especially because it uses the spring module, and here you can see what it's doing. The spring module, it's the input is manipulated with a motion LFO, as you can see here, or no, it's a curve, right? Yeah, but it's manipulated with that. So with the different modulation source modulates the modulation source. Yeah, so just an example for the spring module. I just was glad to find one. A cool one. So yeah, that's it from me, because I think my time's up and I don't have more presets to show. So I hope everything was interesting. I hope everything was good to understand. And if you have any questions regarding anything, feel free to ask. Even after Jannik's done, we can discuss further questions. Everything's no problem. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Excellent. Thank you for that. An incredibly transformative demonstration. Well done. Simon.
I'd just like to mention that the Sci-Fi Weapons Collection is a very interesting application of Enrage that was done by Jan, who is the programmer behind Enrage, and so he has used that collection to demonstrate some pretty wacky implementations of Enrage to produce interesting sounds. Well worth checking out.
Yeah, absolutely. And great to see the Strata collections here. Thanks for giving us a preview of one of the upcoming collections from Boom. And again, we're seeing the multi-track on display here. All of these individual assets available as part of the collections, as well as the rendered outputs that you can just reach in and grab. And all of the Enrage plugin settings right alongside these collections, implemented in place, all of the macros, a ton to learn from, but seeing your process, how you arrive at some of these, finely sculpted and crafted sounds just helps us arrive to these projects, to see the authoring that you do that goes into each of these sounds in the collection, each of these layers in some cases. An incredible amount of work and an incredible testament to your skill and ability as a sound designer. Thank you for taking us through that. Groovy. Transition point. Let's...
Yeah, I will stop. Yes, Jannik will continue.
Sounds great.
Wonderful.
Right. Thanks so much.
All right, so let me start my screen share. And let's take a look. So now you should see everything.
I can see everything.
You can see everything, wonderful. So let's take a look at some nasty Gore stuff. So I'm currently inside of the, also sounds weird in regards to Gore when you say we're inside, but we're now inside of the body internal session. That's pretty wonderful. And let's have a listen to one of the sounds that's inside there, which is Bloodstream. And Bloodstream basically is a texture that you can modify by using Reaper macros. Let's first take a listen on how the texture sounds by default. So I hope you can hear something.
Yeah,
We
sounds
are
great.
inside the body of something.
All right, so the first Reaper macro we can take a look at is called thin to thick. So what this basically does, it allows you to create a thicker and bigger and more nasty sounding texture. Currently, we're in 100% thin mode, I want to call it for now. So let's play the texture and shift to thick. So yeah, you get a little bit of additional textures there and also a little bit of low end. The second macro is called Intensify. So let's also play with that while hearing the sound. So yeah, as the name suggests, it gets even nastier with that one. And the way they work is, let's take a look at, for example, the layer here. So those Reaper macros control Enrage macros that then control some effects. So for example, this is the underwater layer of that sound, and we can listen to the individual layers for now. So this is the main layer. We do have a layer with underwater recordings. some nice bubbles. Some low end. And some, well, I called it grid, some additional textures.
Man, every time I hear that, I almost think that it's like cracking ice, like when you're out on a frozen lake. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like cracking ice. It's a little different, but yeah, I get that. Yeah. Interesting. So let's quickly take a look at how those macros work. So for example, on the underwater movement layer, this thin to thick macro controls a formant shifter. So when we're in thin mode, the formants get shifted up a little bit. In thin mode, we get a little bit more frequency content around 1500 Hertz. And we got a low cut that cuts away all the low end information when we're in thin mode and releases them basically back when we're in thick mode again. So other layers, for example, the bubble layer just gets muted when we're in 100% thin mode. And we can slowly hear this when we increase the macro, as you can see here. And then, for example, we also have other layers where we can see what Intensify does. So Intensify also, when Intensify is active, we get the full range of low end, for example, on this layer. If Intensify is all the way down, there is a reduction in low end frequencies here. And also Intensify blends in a wave shaper on some tracks, so we get a little bit more saturation. So that's the way the session is configured when you just open it by default. But let's see how we can quickly change what our macros are doing. Let's say when we are in thin mode, we want this layer here, which is a ladder movement. Let's say we want some more high end on that. Let's just quickly put in a parametric EQ, go to high shelf. Let's choose 12 dB. Let's use this macro here to pull it back down to 0, around about 0 at least. And now when we pull this knob, and now we're in thick mode and there's no additional high end. When we're in thin mode, there is some additional high end. So let's
Nice.
down. That's how quickly you could change an existing macro. But let's say, as we can see currently, Intensify doesn't do anything with this track. Let's say we want to change that. So what we can do is we can go onto the FX controls track. We can move the Intensify macro to see, all right, this is our Intensify macro here. We can remember, or at least try to remember, which channel this is. This is channel 23. We can then grab, for example, macro number 2, go to parameter, MIDI link, CC 14-bit, and choose the channel that we remembered. And now when we move Intensify, macro 2 does move as well. So let's just put in a wave shaper with a strong drive and blend it in with Intensify. It's also called is Intensify. And let's listen to it. So that way you could also use macros that are there but aren't affecting any tracks yet. And we can, of course, also create a totally new macro. We can just choose the next free, well, let's call this field here. Choose the next free channel, which would be 24. Let's just grab this knob here. Go to parameter, go to show in track controls, and now a new macro appears on our FX controls. Let's just go onto alias and call this for now movement. Then do the exact same. We just grab macro number 3, assign it to this channel. Now we control macro number 3. We call this also movement. And now we want to add some movement with this thing by choosing an LFO. and using the macro to switch between our minimum rate and maximum rate. So whenever we pull this knob, our LFO gets faster, and also, let's make it more interesting, more noticeable the further we use this macro. Let's use a gain device here. Put that LFO on, and let's listen to what we've created here. Oh, my bad. I did assign wrong macro here. So now you should hear something. So that's how fast you can even create new macros that weren't there before.
That's fantastic. And all that gives you control with a single knob for each of those macros. And those can all be automated on the timeline in Reaper as well.
They can be automated. And yeah, you can basically use those Reaper macros to control so many different Enrage instances over so many different tracks. The only thing you got to make sure when setting this up, in this session, every one of those tracks gets a MIDI send from the FX control. That's very important. If there wouldn't be, for example, let's say a MIDI send from this channel to this channel, this connection between the Reaper macro and the Enrage macro wouldn't work. So this is important to set up, or at least check if it's there. Fast way to check is if you just go onto the channel that you want to assign a Reaper macro to, click on routing here, and you can see that there's a receive from FX control, a MIDI receive. That's important to make sure. So let's quickly also take a look at how to add randomization to a texture like that. So that's the texture as it currently is. So let's add an instance of Enrage on the composite track and add some movement. So this is pretty random. I just opened an envelope follower here. I always like to assign certain elements to the input signal. So there's some connections between my processing and the actual signal that I'm processing. I always like to do that. I like to have a random LFO here to create some kind of random movement, and then just some other LFO where I created some cross modulation. So for example, this LFO is controlled. So the rate is controlled by the random LFO, while the depth is controlled by the envelope follower. And then you can just throw in random devices and start experimenting. So for example, we can modulate a gain device. We can use different modulation sources to modulate a filter, a low shelf here, a peak EQ, and then just add movement like this. Or we can add a bandpass filter, run it into a wave shaper that is dynamically controlled by our envelope follower. Also a formant shifter, make it mono with a panning device, and assign an LFO to the panning to create something like this. And of course, also blend between those two chains when we run them parallel. Now, for example, this texture is already relatively complex, so it probably wouldn't need that much movement. But let's, for example, just say you recorded a very simple air conditioner or something, some humming that is relatively constant and not very, very spectacular. You can just create a bunch of those presets, save them, and then whenever you got a sound that is too boring, just throw one of those presets on and get a lot of movement out of it.
Well, and this speaks to game audio in that a lot of times you're looking for, that variation, that randomization. You come into a space, it needs to sound different every time to, suspend the disbelief, to maintain the immersion. that I'm not just hearing a loop, or I'm not just hearing the same thing again. We have this ability to recognize repetition, and it's tools and techniques like this that give you content that can be, continuously created dynamically with this kind of randomization, and really extend the content that you have exponentially in order to, blanket the world in a believable way. So really nice technique.
Other thing you could, of course, also do is, let's just say you run a parallel noise generator with some pink noise. You can basically filter that, put a high cut on it, distort it a little bit, put a moving phaser on it, and control the gain of your white noise through the envelope follower to maybe add some more low end to something, some rumble. Let's make the texture a little thinner, and let's fade in this noise. Give it a texture. And for example, that would be the noise by itself. Could be, for example, pretty interesting when you're designing wind, which is just an example.
Yeah, great technique. Again, kind of synthesizing or resynthesizing alongside of it.
You could, for example, also do this by using a saw wave or square wave when you're working with an electrical humming sound, for example, that you want to kind of boost a little bit, or that isn't tonal enough. For example, when you find out at what frequency it's humming, you can basically create a saw wave at the same frequency and blend it with your recording, just as an example, using a similar technique. Yeah. Sorry, Simon.
Yes, I wanted to say I have seen this technique used on a quadcopter's collection, where the recordings of the quadcopter are very realistic, are super realistic, but you don't necessarily, a quadcopter, it's not necessarily the most it's not necessarily telling a big part of the story. Is it an enemy quadcopter, or is it very particularly menacing or dangerous? And they've created layers in it that add sort of an extra dimension to the quadcopter by using this similar technique. And something that I've seen across lots of the different collections is how different designers are using Enrage in very different and effective ways to do very different things. But so that it seems to me that it's a plugin that's very adaptable to whatever your designer envisages as oh, I need to have this, or I need that out of this a sound, and that's inherent in its flexibility. And as you mentioned, the fact that the Strata projects are set up with lots of control tracks to enable quick customization of things like little to large is something that immediately gets you into the creative flow of modifying the sounds to what you need for your particular scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also think it's a little bit similar to DAWs, for example, because Enrage is basically so complex that it allows you to be able to create your own workflow similar to audio programs or DAWs in general. It isn't possible in a software that or plugin that doesn't have that much possibility and things to do. So you can really create your own workflows with it. That's the really interesting part. And I think almost every designer working on Strata, I think probably has his own workflows and ways to do things with Enrage. Get also to similar goals, but on different ways. It's also sometimes really interesting. All right, so now let's take a look at the other sounds from the body internals session, which is a heartbeat. Again, we have a macro to change the sound. This time it's a little bit more abstract, I think, because the macro is called interior to exterior. So to explain what it does, let's imagine a microphone that is either placed inside of a body, so right besides the heart. So it captures both the low-end thumb pumping beat of the heart, but also some blood texture and flesh movement, basically, which is what you hear now. But you can basically also put the microphone to an exterior position, meaning it's right in front of a human with, in that case, a closed torso. So we're not talking about a dead human, at least for now. So the heartbeat basically gets muffled by all the skin and flesh and stuff that is basically your torso. So we have a sound like this. More classic heartbeat. And you can just always seamlessly blend between both states.
It reminds me of taking like a fantastic voyage from the outside to the inside, and we're hearing that heartbeat through that transition and able to dynamically control that perspective of the camera as it flies through.
Exactly. So sometimes you got that in some horror movies or games that you got stuff like that where, for example, let's just an example, follow a bullet that flies through the air, hits somebody, but then you get the perspective of the bullet and you're inside of the human at some point, which of course somehow needs to change the sound of it. And we do have 3 intensities. So we do have a soft, medium, and hard heartbeat. And let's quickly take a look at the soft one. And specifically this layer here. So as you can see, this is a mono recording. This is a hydrophone underwater recording. And let's just say we want to make a stereo sound out of this. One thing we could do and will do is grab a chorus and go into spread phase mode. Now, if you only do that, it sounds like this. Without, it sounds like this. So it basically now is stereo. However, let's imagine you do export or bounce this into mono. So you're doing a mono down mix. You might run into some mono compatibility issues. So let's simulate that by using a panning device and pulling the width all the way down. As you can hear, it doesn't sound good somehow. There's something weird happening, so let's find out how to fix that. So what you can do is run the chorus into an MS split, completely mute the mid signal and only keep the side signal, merge it again, and of course use a gain device here with a macro to control the width later, and run a parallel path with the dry signal. So now we're basically only using the side signal of the newly generated fake stereo image and blend it with the mono signal. So we basically get a stereo signal. It sounds exactly the same as just the mono version when you mix it down to mono. However, in stereo, we do have stereo information.
Nice. That was a clear illustration, came through great.
Another interesting thing you can do is mess around with the phase of your signal. For example, by just stacking a bunch of all-pass filters. So they're basically just doing exactly the same. They're controlled by macros. And this basically creates this very, very satisfying, it's always hard to describe. I tend to call it the oomph sound, which isn't really a word. It's more of describing how the sound sounds. If you use a low frequency, it gives you this kind of almost 808-like sustain to a certain degree. So let's listen to how this sounds with the effect on and without. relatively subtle, but I think it should be audible. It's got a little bit more sustain. So you could do that by just stacking all pass filters. Another way to do this, that just sounds a little different, is by stacking multi-band splits. In that case, I just stacked, I think it's 12 3-band splits. They're also doing the exact same. They're also controlled by macros, so that the crossover frequencies are at the exact same frequency here. And this creates a similar sound. We can even exaggerate that by just duplicating it. You can basically go how crazy you want to go with it. And it's a similar kind of sound, just a little different depending on if you're using 3-band splits or if you're using all pass filters in that case. So that's basically all I wanted to show from the body internal session. Now, is there anything you want to see in this session before I switch to the other one?
Well, and we did a deep dive behind the scenes on this collection with Chase Steele as part of our Wise Up on Air hands-on. So dig back into that previous episode if you want to go even deeper into some of these sounds. But again, I think you've pulled it apart, exploded it, and really dug into some of the cool pieces of sound design that you've implemented as part of macros for that heartbeat and was it fluid?
Bloodstream, basically. But you can use it for a lot of things that are Gore related and need some texture, I think.
Yeah, and there's even a world where some of that is like lava in my imagination. There's room for that to extend into other non-horror aspects, and that's again one of the greatest flexibilities of the collection. Is really it's up to you to imagine the scenario that these sounds fit in, and there's just so much there to work with that you can take and fit it to these scenarios in whatever way makes sense. So thanks for that.
All right. Let's take a look at the body extreme session, which is my favorite session because we got a lot of extreme stuff in here. So we do have stuff like skull crushes, neck breaks, body crushes, body impacts, and more abstract stuff such as eyeball pop, which I will explain later, and teeth pulling. So in most cases, we do have a short one and a long one, and 6 variation per short one and long one. And let's quickly listen to some examples. So this is a short skull crush, and this is a long one. This is a short neck break. This is a long one. This is a short body crush. And that's a long one. Now let's go to the eyeball pop. So this sound might need some explanation. So what I was imagining is you're in a fight. Let's just imagine that you're in a fight with somebody, and I don't know how you do that, but you manage to grab your opponent's eyeball, you twist it and pull it out, and at some point the nerve just breaks apart. And this is what this would sound like, I guess. And then you're basically pulling teeth. Yeah. So this is Gore Extreme here. And let's take a look at the body crush long, specifically at those 2 layers here. So this is a impact. And this is some kind of Gore texture. And also, let's listen to the whole sound again. Now what I want to talk about now is how to use dugging for your advances. So if you listen to those 2 sounds, currently they work good together. However, there is some dugging here that allows them to work together. So if I mute the dugging here, you can hear that this second impact here, in my opinion, it just clashes a little bit with this impact because there's in both sounds a lot of low end. And can use ducking to create some space for this main impact, which basically makes this main impact sound bigger and heavier. So you can do that by using a send from the body crush impact to the sidechain input of this channel here, but then opening an envelope follower and choosing sidechain input instead of main input here. And then just using the envelope follower to just duck a gain module. And you create some space. Now that's the most basic way you could use ducking, and there are more advanced ones. So for example, you could also only duck the side signal of a signal or the mid signal by using an MS split. Just for demonstration purposes, I will also put a 24 dB boost here on the side signal because this sound is more or less pretty narrow. Let's listen to how it sounds with the 24 dB boost. Now it's a little wider. And you could put a ducker just on the side signal. You can hear how it narrows down whenever this impact comes. Or you put it on the mid signal, which sounds even weirder. Or you could put it on both. And I don't know, for example, just duck the side a little more than the mid signal. Which is probably what I would do in that situation. Another thing you could do is to use an equalizer for ducking. Now, let's say you only want to duck around 53 Hertz. You could do this by using the same envelope follower. However, you will run into some problems here, and I will quickly show what I mean. So let's say we put a low-cut filter on the channel where we receive our sidechain signal from. So we take out all of the low end. Let's listen to this envelope follower here on how that would sound. As you can hear.
Yeah.
So now we only have high-end information here, or at least high-frequency information. And there's still ducking happening around 53 Hertz, which does not make that much sense. If there's only high-end information. Frequency information here. So there's a way to avoid that. Basically, you can use a parametric EQ. You can map frequency and Q factor to macros. And you run a parallel bandpass filter where you do the same. So basically, when you're changing the frequency here, changes on both EQ modules. Now, this bandpass module here does not receive your stereo input. It does receive the sidechain input. We're creating basically a sidechain version of our sidechain input. And then we're using the tab send here to send this to an envelope follower. So when we're listening now to this sidechain input, I will bypass the low cut here again. You can hear that our sidechain input, the frequency range changes depending on which frequency we want to duck, meaning we're only ducking our low end when there is low-end information in our sidechain signal.
Nice.
Now to demonstrate it, I can quickly low-cut our sidechain signal again, and we can see no ducking happening, but when we get the full frequency range with the low end, there's some ducking happening here. That's one way you could only duck specific frequencies.
That's great. That question came in through the chat and you answered it in real time. It was brilliant. Again, a great technique for cleaning things up and getting focus.
What was the question specifically?
Oh, it was, is there a way to duck sidechain based on a specific frequency? Bam. Did it.
Interesting. Now you can also use Hähn for ducking. For example, if you only want to duck, let's say, resonances and tonal information by just setting up, for example, that way and ducking the threshold with the sidechain input, that would sound like this. Let's make it, turn it off. Now with that sound, it doesn't do that much, but I wanted to mention that you could also use a device like Hähn for ducking. All right, let's take a look what else we could do with this tap send method here that we used to create interesting ducking effects here. Let's go onto our composite track here and open up this preset. Now, let's see how we can build a dynamic EQ filter. So to quickly summarize what we want to build is we want to have a dynamic EQ filter that can both dynamically boost and reduce at a specific frequency range. Now, one way you could do that, or at least how I did it, I'm running 2 parallel parametric EQs, and I'm again mapping frequency and Q factor to macros, so that whenever I change something here, both of those filters behave exactly the same currently. I'm then running again a parallel bandpass filter where I do it exactly the same. So again, when I move frequency here, it changes in this bandpass and in those 2 parametric EQs. Now, we don't have a sidechain signal here, so this bandpass this time gets also our stereo input. And we again use tap send to send this to an envelope follower. So now we're using this envelope follower on this additive channel to boost gain and on this subtractive channel to reduce gain. So currently that doesn't work pretty well because the result would be that we're listening to the subtractive channel and the additive channel at the same time. Let's find out how to change that. So we can set up a gain macro here and use a mapping device that you can find here. And use this macro to control it, draw in a curve like that. So this is basically, let's call this a binary curve because we're only having positive values here and negative values here. And set it up in a way that 0.5 is exactly on the edge, and use this modulation source to control 2 gain devices down here. So that 0.5 is our default value where neither gain is pushed or reduced. And every value bigger than 0.5 basically now mutes our subtractive channel and only lets through our additive channel, while at the same time every value smaller than 0.5 only lets through our subtractive channel here and totally mutes our additive channel. Now, currently we would listen to only the positive or negative channel here, but the amount of gain movement here would be exactly the same because this is controlled by the envelope follower, which just gets a bandpass signal. Now let's find out how we can also use this knob to control the amount of gain movement we got on those 2 filters here. We can use a second mapping device with a curve like that controls another gain device down here. So that way, when we're at 100% reduce, all of the signal gets sent to our envelope follower, meaning we get the biggest amount of gain movement on those 2 filters. But the same happens when we're at 100% boost. And when we lower this, we basically get to the point where we're at 0.5, so exactly in the middle. In that situation, no arrives at our envelope follower, meaning we can now switch between those 2 paths with this knob and also control the amount of gain we're sending to our envelope follower and therefore control how much gain movement we will have on those 2 filters. So we have a dynamic EQ filter.
Yeah, that's great. And you can hear the notch of that filter moving around as you're changing that macro. Really detailed implementation in order to get that kind of precision over, what's happening with the envelope, how it's driving those 2 parallel paths. And, again, like really exposing some of the detail work that goes into ensuring that each of these sounds has their best representation and controllability using Enrage.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's also take a look at a mastering device that we could build. Let's say we're done with this sound design and we want to make it sound a little different. we could use a 3-band split here to split our signal into a low frequency, mid frequency, and high frequency range, and then use MS splits for each frequency band. So we get the mid signal of our low end, the side signal from our low end, and so on for 3 frequency bands, to then add saturation and gain controls for every splitted split. Let's phrase it that way. Merge it again, and then you could have just a passive mastering EQ, 3-band EQ at the end. Let's quickly listen to how this could sound. First of all, just using the passive EQ down here. Taking out some of the high end, for example, or the low end. You could also change the crossover frequency here, or you could specifically only saturate the mid signal of your high frequency range, or the side signal. Same for the mid range. Or only the mid signal of your low end. Or you do a combination of all of them. And again, you can do the same with gain as well.
That's fantastic. You know, that final piece of the puzzle, you know, making sure that all of your frequencies are locked in and you have the best representation of that sound at the end of the signal chain. It's a, you know, I think we inherently hear the word mastering, and we understand that it's that last piece that brings a kind of consistency across content. We had a great example of some real-time multi-band side chaining in a recent Wise Up on Air that we did with the folks from Baldur's Gate 3, where they were using Wise metering and side chaining to both expand and compress aspects of the mix in real time. And so folks want to dig back into a real-time example of that, check that live stream out. Meanwhile, keep going. You are all the way in on this deep dive into Enrage, and I couldn't be more excited about what's coming next.
So that was everything related to the Gore library. And now I quickly want to show some examples of what you could do for creature sound design. So therefore, I just imported a bunch of animal sounds here. So let's quickly listen to the first sound without processing. So this is a dolphin clicking from the Aquatic Predators Boom library. And let's say you want to use this for some kind of insect creature, very large centipede, for example. And you want to make it sound like it's coming outside of the creature, so it needs some kind of resonance and movement. So what you could do, or at least what I did for that use cases, is I created a bunch of parallel vowel filters. They're all at different settings. Some of them are moving, controlled through an O, for example. And let's listen to how this could sound. You just get a lot more resonance, and to me, it makes it feel like there is some kind of body around it. It's not just existing in this clean space as the raw recording is, which is something that, of course, you want to have when it's coming outside of a creature, and something that you don't want to have when you want to have a recording that you can use for everything you want. You don't want this kind of course, resonance sometimes. So it's good to have this clean clicking. You can do everything with it, and then just put this vowelizer on it and create some resonances. So I use this very often when working with clicking sounds, also clicking prop sounds like cutter, or what are they called, cutter knives or rulers, for example.
Ooh, yeah.
Whenever I need to put some resonance onto some clicking sounds, I like to use. Another thing you could do, let's listen to a lion sound from the Monsters and Beasts Boom library. let's say we want to stylize this. So a preset I built for that is something I called Creature Growl Phaser. It's a combination of compression, dynamic form and shifting, saturation, EQing, and a phaser. Let's listen to how this would sound. So you basically just change the character and resonance of the sound and stylize it to a certain degree. So it doesn't sound exactly like a lion, basically. It sounds a little different now. And
yeah, it did give it a otherworldly kind of resonance and tonality to it, for sure, abstracting it from its more natural kind of sound. And some cool stuff going there. You mentioned a phase as being part of it, as well as some other stuff there in the Enrage chain.
Yeah, so we can go through all of it. The compressor doesn't do it that much. We can just listen to it. Doesn't do that much. The form and shifter does a lot. So the form and shifter is controlled by an envelope follower, and the form and shifter basically changes the character of the sound a little bit and also creates or adds some high end. And there's a dynamically controlled two-band split also, so the harmonic section is also dynamic. I always like to have dynamic effects, or at least effects that are changing or responding to my input signal when designing creatures, because I sometimes feel like if you create dynamic effects on creatures, the effect sounds more live than it would sound otherwise if it just had the same saturation at the same frequency range. Sometimes it can be to create a little movement with this sound, and that's what I try to do here. I then took out a little bit of harshness with a EQ. And just added some resonance with the phaser. So the biggest part of this preset is basically the phaser and the form and shifting.
Yeah, great chain of effects that brings a really otherworldly tonality to what is a very natural sounding. And not been close to too many lions in my life, but it definitely pushes it into the abstract.
And of course, you can find quite a lot of these creative uses in the Strata Creature and Creature Ancient collections.
Yep, exactly.
Where and Creature Humanoid as well, which is another amazing collection in terms of how you're combining human and creature sounds, and they manage to sound like they're coming out of a living creature, a living humanoid creature.
Yeah. So I think also all of those presets I got here are presets I basically created for any of the Strata creature collections. So I don't know when exactly I created them, but they're either first time appearing in the creature or creature humanoid or any of the animal collections as well, like Animal Wild or the Creature Ancient. Some stuff is also from the Creature Ancient. So you can basically find all those presets as well as others in all of those collections. So
and what's great about that too is that if you've got your own, maybe you've done your own vocalizations, maybe you have been out in the field capturing the sound of animals with a microphone, like immediately dropping those in, invoking these Enrage presets, hearing it process through this signal chain, like what a great way to extend and imagine these different creature sounds and leverage all of the hard work you've done creating the presets. Cool stuff.
Let's also listen to the most dangerous animal here, which is a goose from the Alien Live Boom library. Listen to this one. I was actually really satisfied when I found out that goose can hiss. It's really interesting. Let's say we want to add a tremolo on that. What we could do is just use a gain device and a static tremolo, and this would sound like this. Now it's a tremolo, but doesn't really sound like the tremolo you would know from an animal that has a natural tremolo, like some birds do. So let's find out how we can make this more interesting. So you can basically create an LFO and use an envelope follower to switch between your minimum and maximum rate and also control the depth of your signal, meaning whenever my input signal gets louder, my tremolo effect becomes faster, but also less noticeable, meaning when my sound fades out, the tremolo becomes slower and more noticeable. It sounds interesting. So let's listen to how this sounds compared to the first tremolo. So I think especially around this place here, where the volume drops very fast, you hear a huge difference between those two tremolos when it comes down to how natural they sound. Because the tremolo almost stops here compared to this one, which just runs all through the signal. So I always like to do that when doing effects like that, where I basically create effects that create some kind of movements. I always like to put in some randomness and also make this movement react to my input signal. So that way I kind of feel like it really breathes with the creature. Phrase it in a weird way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Again, you're driving the effect property from the amplitude of the sound, and in that way you're getting a dynamic that, you know, lives and breathes along with that sound.
Exactly.
Can you make the sample frequency go deeper near the end of the sample? This is a question coming in from the chat from Jermaine. Thanks for hanging with us.
Can I make the sample frequency go deeper? So
yeah, I think boost the low frequencies towards the end of the sample. Maybe a reverse envelope follower that increases the bass. Now Jannik, we're asking you to do magic tricks.
I'm just trying to understand the question. So you want to boost low end, right?
Yeah, okay. Towards the end of the sample.
Sure. Towards the end of the sample. So meaning whenever our sound fades out, right?
I think so.
Yep.
See if there's any clarification coming in a second, but
sure. Let's do that. So we could, for example, just take. There we go. Let's take a low shelf just as an example. There are always multiple ways to do that, but let's just use a low shelf. Let's see if there is a low frequency content in this sound. So this is a hissing sound, so there isn't that much low frequency content in the sound. We could again do this, for example, with some layered sine wave, but I'm not a huge fan of doing that when doing creatures. So let's just do it that way here. So we can use this EQ filter here, put it all the way up, and use the LFO to lower the gain. So every time our signal gets louder, we reduce the amount of low end. Cool. This way, one way you could do that, or you could of course also use maybe the trigger section here and create a curve if you only want to affect the end of it. Let's just try that. See how long the sound is. That was exactly the wrong way.
Cool.
That works specifically for the length of this sound, but there are, as always, so many different ways you could do that. You could do the same with a multi-band distortion. For example, something similar that Wieland built right before me, where you could use a multi-band split that you can find here. For example,
That's
just
great.
a two-band split and just add a wave shaper there. Let's quickly show how this would look like. Let's delete that.
I love this real-time sound design. Thanks for the suggestion from the chat. Let us know how we're landing with this.
So let's do it that way. Let's put a wave shaper here and a gain device here. Let's use a strong drive and yeah, basically just do the same as before, but now with distortion. I did the wrong way. Now we're blending in some low-end distortion here.
Awesome. So the further comment was it creating that variation could come across as a dialect or communication between animals or species. So I think you've nailed it 3 different ways, and there's still a long way to go if you need more in Enrage. Great.
Just to mention, you could, as Wieland also showed, you could use sub-octavers. You could create a parallel path with a pitch down version that you distort to get even more low end. There's so many different ways, or use the other way, where, like I showed before, where you could use some sine wave, very low sine wave, or filtered noise that you control through an envelope follower to add low end to a sound that or even doesn't have low end at all. There's so many ways that you could do that, basically. Just
fantastic.
Depends on what sound you're specifically going for. So let's
Your limit is your creativity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's take a look at some technical stuff and figure out how to use Enrage for denoising. This is a completely raw recording of a hawk I did last year. Now it doesn't sound too bad. However, if we put a limiter, we can hear there's some rumble there and some noise, so it doesn't sound that good. So first thing we could do is use a factory preset called DeNoise high frequency hiss. So this is a dynamically controlled high share filter that cuts out high frequencies whenever your main signal isn't present if you set it up right. So let's listen how this could sound. Now, there's still noise, but the high frequency noise is a little better. Now, the next thing you could do is set up a 6-band multi-band split gate, or in that case, expander thing, where you can control, for example, threshold and mix of the gate. And also, there's also something I've added here for really quiet signals. You can basically boost 12 dB before the gate so that the threshold works more accurately, and reduce the same amount after it, so it doesn't work as an EQ, or at least as less as possible works as an EQ. And let's see how we can denoise this even further by using a multiband expander. First without, and now with the. So pretty clean.
Yes, and no artifacts that you would get by using FFT-based noise reduction, which, as you, no matter how good it is, it does tend to affect the purity of the sound. So you very much maintain that purity of the sound there.
Good that you mentioned it, because now we're coming exactly to that thing that you mentioned. We're now using Tame to take this even further by just boosting some resonances here and lowering the gain a little bit. So as you can see, this is a very tonal sound, and we can just boost the tonality and resonances a little bit and get it even further out of the noise. And I also got an example to quickly demonstrate, get an idea of what this actually does. So for that, I prepared a sine wave at 440 Hertz and some white noise. Let's listen to that. Now let's activate tame. So first of all, the sine wave will be quieter. But let's hit isolate peak and listen to how it sounds now. Keep in mind, I didn't mute the noise. This is just tame in isolate peaks mode. So that's basically also one way you could use tame for some denoising, either through isolate peaks or like I did in that example by just boosting resonances and tonality after this dynamic EQ and multiband expander here.
Now, another amazing tool in the toolbox.
Absolutely, it's one of my favorite devices in Enrage. I use this all the time. Another interesting thing is, important to mention here, this is a sound from the Cyber Weapons Constructor Kit from Boom Library. However, this is not the way the sound is in the library because I've added a very ugly reverb to it. And I will show you how ugly this reverb sounds now. Doesn't sound that good. So let's try to get rid of it by using the transient modulation source in Enrage that just controls a gain module. Let's see of how much reverb we can get rid of by using this. So before, after. That's the thing I always like when, for example, recording clicking sounds or sounds that are basically only transients. I sometimes feel like they're hard to denoise and to de-reverb, especially when you're using, for example, the dynamic EQs or something, because the EQ isn't fast enough. So I always like to use some kind of transient shaping for that. And I just found out that Enrage does this really good. I'm always using this kind of approach when working with sounds like this. So for example, I recorded a stork, the beak clapping of a stork in a location with little reverb and little noise, and got some pretty clean results by using transient shaping in Enrage. So that's actually the last thing I wanted to show here in this session and at all. But the very last thing is how to share presets. So let's say you created this preset and you want to share this. You could just click up here, right-click the preset and go to Show in File System. And basically your whole preset folder appears. You could just drag and drop this, for example, into Discord or whatever way you want to send something. And also prepared something here because importing preset works the same way. I created this preset Wise on Air. Let's just drag and drop this in here. Close this folder. Open Enrage again here. Type in Wise. And now our preset is here. Let's double click and we can see this is an amazing preset. This is the ultimate silencer. Wonderful. Important to mention, you only get to this by clicking on a preset that you created or at least saved. This doesn't work. So for example, if I take a look at this here, those are all presets I created or at least saved. And here you can go on Show in File System. However, with a factory preset, that doesn't work. That's important to mention. And if there aren't any questions regarding those specific examples here, I would be done with my part. And I hope you found this interesting.
Wow. The deepest of deep dives into Enrage across two fantastic presentations by expert sound designers who've been contributing to the Strata library as well as the Boom libraries. Excellent overview of those. Folks in the chat are sending their thanks to that. I wanted to very quickly mention that for folks who are interested, they can jump in to Strata. Strata is available at audiokinetic.com. It is your sound library in multi-track format. It comes out of the gate with a couple of free sample collections. These are sub-projects from the collections. That Creatures Humanoid collection that we mentioned is excerpted in there, along with all of the Enrage settings in read-only mode. Fantastic way to get started, not only with samples across these collections, but also with Enrage and some of these presets that we've been talking about today. There's subscription models to cover you for a single project, any number of projects, as well as our academic or student subscription model, which really allows for a masterclass into these sound design techniques that have been on display today. Fantastic opportunity for students out there. And again, Strata, it's the multi-tracks, all of these layers, renders that you can just reach in and grab, along with the Enrage VST plugin, Wwise DSP as VSTs, and the IEM suite of plugins. All of this standardized using the UCS naming format. We've got integrations with Wwise and our Wwise extension, Soundly, SoundMiner, Basshead, and then of course all of our partners working to create these incredible collections, subscriptions, and we just keep making more. So jump over to audiokinetic.com, grab the free samples, get subscribed, and dig back into past episodes of Wise Up on Air, where we've gone hands-on with many of these collections, lifted the hood, and dug in deep with Chase Steele, exposing all of the cool stuff. Some really incredible moments of exploration, including today. Thank you to everyone here today. Jannik, Wieland, so great to have your expertise as part of Wise Up on Air today.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. It was a lot of fun to be here.
Damien, may I share something? I was talking with some audio directors the other day about Strata and the academic subscription, which is very reasonably priced. And they said, if we don't see that a junior sound designer who's applying for a position is using Strata and is not using Strata, then they haven't invested enough in their sound design education, and we can automatically exclude them from the selection process. And that was completely unprovoked, nothing on my heart leading them into that conclusion. But it was, I would thoroughly recommend that if you're a student of sound design, as I am, even 60 years into the whole adventure of sound design, can learn from these master users of Enrage, I'd take a look.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a gift to have that accessible to folks as a resource. Again, so much of your work over at Boom is, on display and accessible for people to dig into behind the scenes. And thanks again for, exposing the way that you think about sound design here. I think this is one of the
truly inspiring.
Yeah, hardest things to convey, and you both did a fantastic job of communicating these things that maybe you think about as you're finding your way through to the best sound, and being able to communicate that clearly. Well, it's a gift, so thank you for showing up with such great illustrations. So cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.
All right. Well, this has been Wise Up on Air, Backstage with Enrage. Thanks to Masha Litvinova for that fantastic title for today's live stream. The support of everyone at Audio Kinetic for pulling this off, and folks at Boom for being here today in the chat and here with us live. So if you enjoyed this, circle back. We'll keep putting out great content for you here at Audio Kinetic, and let us know what you think in the comments below. Again, thanks to our guests today, and have a great one.